Hello, everybody. This is Marina and this video is inspired by Prince of Queens. And I think Prince of Queens made a very great video, and it's really got me to thinking. And I really wanted to um, let you guys know how my opinions towards microaggressions and color blindness has changed, because as many of you know, I watched a lot of anti-feminist content, anti-SJW content, but however, I have also noticed that we've been miscommunicating. Like, I don't think that the antis have necessarily won because I think it's much more like the social justice warriors have been doing a really good job pissing everybody off. So, because the social justice warriors have done a really great job pissing everybody off, it could, give the impression that we've won when really there seems to be a communication problem. Therefore, I do question how many minds have been changed because communications is very important. It's one of the reasons why my favorite person in history is Dale Carnegie. Dale Carnegie, who is or was a communications expert and taught people the best way to communicate with each other. Because, if you don't engage in effective communications, this victory that the anti social justice work community is experiencing is most likely short lived. It's not going to last very long. You got to understand where a person is coming from and either change their minds or just come to agreements where both of you get something that you want. But we are moving forward though, and things cannot go back to the way things were. Or here is one of my favorite quotes. It's by Dale Carnegie. Quotes, when dealing with people, let's just remember we are not dealing with creatures of logic. We are dealing with creatures of emotion. And I think that is really, really important. Or to quote Martin Luther King Jr., the Negro needs the white man to free him from his fears. But I mean, I think he should have said insecurity because I look at social justice warriors, whatnot, it seems like they are filled with insecurities. Back to the quotes. The white man needs the Negro to free him from his guilt. Now, of course, not all white people feel white guilt. Of course, there is a selected few white people who feel white guilt, and they tend to be on the left, and the white people who feel no white guilt tends to be on the right. And when it comes to the Negro, quoting Martin Luther King, needs the white man to free him from his fears, I think a better word is insecurity. It's like even when you look at the fat acceptance movements, it's like you can tell that they are really, really insecure about being fat. It's like fat acceptance, fat acceptance. That they feel really, really bad and insecure about their weights. It's all about insecurity. No slut shaming. They feel really insecure because they were called a slut. So it leaves them feeling very, very, very insecure. Or it's kind of a lot like, whatever, social justice warriors, they have an insecurity based movement. Their grievances is their insecurities. Um, but like I said, I wanted to revisit color blindness after watching Prince of Queens video. When it comes to the problem with color blindness, is that color blindness, for the most part, is a good idea, but the problem stems from black people and white people have two different cultures, and if you're a white person, going to a black neighborhood could be a lot like going to a different country. And usually, like, as an adult, your mind is probably more nuanced. You're probably thinking you're black, you grew up in a rough neighborhood, probably a dangerous neighborhood. It makes sense that you would act a bit rough or rough around the edges when you grew up in a dangerous neighborhood. But if you say to your child, you know, if a black person does this is wrong, if a white person does this is wrong, whatever you apply to white people, you must apply to black people. It doesn't take into account cultural differences. Like you're a black kid, your father is in jail, your mother is on cocaine, and your mother does prostitution for a living, and you're living in a neighborhood where there is a lot of gunshots, and let me tell you, working at the projects, there are a lot, and I do mean a lot of gunshots in the projects. You're probably at risk of getting in fights on a regular basis. Then, you go to, a white school and, you probably seem like thuggish and a gangster and something else entirely. And then it's kind of like, well, I don't want to associate with you, and it could put you in a position where you do not want to associate with a good chunk of black people, because a lot of black people are from the projects or from the ghetto. So, and there's anxiety, so much stress, so much anxiety, and you're just stressed, so much stress. It's kind of like I could only imagine what it's like being a person from the Middle East and coming to America, and it's kind of like there's just so much stress and anxiety. And it's kind of like, well, my family always told me, a black person act this way, won't hang out with him. A white person, it's color blindness. If you're black, you're white, I'm treating you the same. Problem is nuance, kind of like a black person who grew up in a middle class family and lived in a white neighborhood and probably went to a white church. They are going to, get along with white people better, understand white people better. So it's a lot like that. Color blindness, especially for a child, doesn't address nuance. As an adult, the nuance does enter your mind like, well, a black person is from a dangerous neighborhood and they're probably rougher and tougher because they lived in a really bad environment. So it's kind of like, oh, like I could kind of understand. And, it's kind of like you need the nuclear family. The father needs to be part of the child's life. The women need to be more selective of which man they pick out and whatnot. And you become to think about solutions of how to help the black community. But it's kind of like I could understand if you tell, your white kid color blindness, color blindness. do not hang around anybody who acts like this, and it could lead your kids to notice a pattern, like a bunch of black people act a certain way, like a bunch of black people act ghetto and aggressive, so I won't hang out with black people, and then that in turn could come across as racist. And I think that's probably where the color blindness is coming from, that if you treat people exactly the same, not taking into account that black people probably come from a more dangerous, neighborhood where they had to be more aggressive, and they probably do have to be a little bit more hostile because their life could be in danger and it could die. It could lead, to just avoiding black people over something that, I mean, if you are a child and your dad is in jail or shot dead by the police, and your mother is a prostitute on drugs, then that is something that is beyond your control. You have no control what your parents do, which is how, color blindness could be viewed as a different form of racism. It is because if, like a little kid, a little white girl, is going to take what you say very literally, treats white kids or treat black kids exactly the same way as how it treats white kids, and you're not factoring in, lived experiences such as a dead father and a prostitute for a murder and getting beaten up every day, so you're hostile as a response. So that's a different way to look at it. It's, you know, Black Lives Matter, social justice is still an insecurity based movement, and we haven't really avoiding talking about race is still a problem, because there's lived experiences where a person could have a worse life because they were black. And when it comes to microaggressions, like it's really interesting because when you have white people go to Japan, in Japan, the Japanese are usually very friendly. White people tend to complain about the exact same thing. And this is why I brought up Dale Carnegie. Like, remember, when dealing with humans, you are dealing with a creature of emotion, not a creature of logic. Because when it comes to Japan, white people they complain about the exact same thing. Like people are looking at me funny. Like those Japanese people, they're staring at me. They're looking at me. Well, here in America, black people are complaining about the looks that they get. They're like, oh well, these black people are looking at me like this, and they're looking at me like that, and white people are either. It must be your imagination, and it's like, thank you. Thank you for telling me it's all my imagination. Thank you. That is really dismissive of what a person goes through. And it just goes in dismissing the experience as, well, it's your imagination. Or, well, they're dicks. Let it go. Like, just, they're dicks. Move on. When really, when white people live in Japan, including all their lives, like through a military family, where their family was in the military and they were in Japan all of their lives, white people do complain in Japan the same thing that Black Americans complain about. It's kind of like, man, did the Japanese look at me a certain way, and the Japanese police, like, I was riding my bicycle, and I was stopped by the Japanese police, even though this is my bicycle. The Japanese thought I stolen a bike. It's kind of like the things that black people are complaining about in America. white people are complaining about the exact same thing in Japan, pretty much. And in Japan, you know, I'm pretty sure you're getting treated better than you are in America because, in Japan, they usually go out of their way to be polite and whatnot. And yet you see people complaining about the exact same thing. It's easier to say, oh, well, they're looking at you, just let it go. But when you're in that situation and a bunch of people like give you that look, humans are still emotional creatures. And it could like, it could just leave you feeling very uncomfortable. And I don't know, it's really complicated because Prince of Queens is right. It's like another point he brought up is how, you know, um, how white schools get more funding than black schools. And that is true. Like I went to a predominantly white school. I graduated, like I'm a high school graduate, got my diploma from a predominantly white school. And I was an intern at a black school where I worked in the psychiatrist's office. And um what the students were learning in the seventh or eighth grade was the very thing that I've already learned in the second grade. Like in the eighth grade, black students were learning, the state's name and the state's capital. Like, oh, like, Los Angeles is the capital of California or Sacramento or some shits. And it's kind of like Montgomery is the capital of Alabama, and they're learning all of the capitals, and I learned that in the second grade, and I don't remember any of it, obviously. I think Sacramento is the capital of California, come to think of it, but still, it's like they have been learning in the eighth grade the things I learned in the second grade, like Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. It's kind of like you're learning this now, that's quite odd. And I think that's in a sense some of the responsibility falls on black parents. Maybe not all of the responsibility, but it's like again, as a black woman, you could be very selective of which man you get so that you don't end up with a man who goes to jail or gets shot by the police. As a black woman, you could be more selective instead of just going by physical attraction. And it's kind of like when it comes to white people, I think white people network more. Like I do think, it's kind of like whites, the mayor who's usually whites or the governor who's usually whites, they go to church. And as a white person, you can tell the mayor or the governor your concerns. That's the white person like, I have a problem with this. I have a problem with that. I think the schools should get more funding. You could be a white person going to a white church and you could talk to the mayor, you could talk to the governor about your concerns. But you don't see black people going to a white church to network, you know, to be a lot like, hey, you're the governor, right? Or you're the mayor. Hey, how you doing? I would like to talk to you about issues that I'm concerned with. I am concerned that, my kids aren't getting the education that they need. Black people don't network, when really the black people who do network are usually better off. Like when a black person goes to a white church and then they introduce themselves and they talk to all the white people, and the next thing you know, this black person has a good job. This black person is now getting paid, you know, a decent amount of money through socializing with white people. But usually uh, black people do self-segregate. Black people do self-segregate. And in a way, a black church is like a safe space. It's a way to just get away from gets away from white people and just deal with people of be with people of your skin color, which makes insecurities worse. Your insecurities is worse, and it's like you're there for brotherhood, and you know, nothing gets ever really addressed. Things gets worse, and it's bad on white people's end too. Like white people, like I I I grew up in the ghetto, but I went to white school. And things that I've learned early off is that there is a strong cultural difference between blacks and whites. Like I would come home to the ghetto every day, go to a white school every day, and there are just cultural differences. And it also made things hard for me. And this includes how white people behave, because white people have a bit of an avoidance personality. Like instead of having a problem and addressing it, like Ran, you do this and it bothers me, white people are more likely to avoid you or at really Machiavellian. Like growing up in a black neighborhood, like I grew up in the ghetto, grew up in the streets, but I went to a white neighborhood, the white kids would avoid me and they would shun me instead of telling me what the problem is. And the very first time I began to realize the problematic things I was doing was through the internet, where somebody on the internet would be like, "Well, do you know that you do this? Do you know that you do that?" And it's like, "Well, thank you. Finally, finally somebody tells me." It's why I disagree with Modwain. I disagree with Modwain, who says that public schools are great for social interactions, when really I found that when I was in a public school that he says is great for social interactions, people were either A, very avoidant, or B, very Machiavellian, sneaky, manipulative, two-faced, where they're your friend to your face, but they backstab you. And it's like, you're my friend, and you stabbed me in the back. And I could see how if you are the only black person in the classroom, how it could make things worse. Because when you are the only black kid in the classroom, trust me, you notice. You notice like when you're like the only black kid in the classroom and everybody around you is all white, so you're friends with white people, and they're your friends, and they backstab you, and they manipulate you, and they treat you like this, and not a single white person comes forward. Not a single white person comes in. They're like, "Hey, that person over there, like Tiffany, she's pretending to be your friend. Watch out for Tiffany." Or that guy, Billy over there, Billy is pretending to be your friend. Billy is saying this about you. Billy is saying that's about you. Hey, I'm telling you, avoid Billy and avoid Tiffany, because they're saying all of these terrible things about you. Instead, Tiffany would be like your friend to your face, and you're like, "Oh yeah, Tiffany, that she's my girl." And Tiffany is like talking about me behind my back, and people are laughing or giggling or giving high fives, and nobody walks up and says, hey, Tiffany's talking about you. There hasn't been enough good people coming forward. And what if like there is another black person with the same experience? Like what if there's like a different black person who's like you're the only black person there, and it's kind of like you're being lied to, you're being manipulated, and instead of people coming forward and saying, "Hey, Tiffany is talking about you. Billy is talking about you," people laugh, they giggle, they give each other high fives, they give you a look and like, they don't say anything to you. It could be a lot like, this is how white people are treating me. Now, of course, white people probably do this to each other, but again, when white people go to Japan and be the only white person there, they do kind of take things more personally, and it gets under your skin. Like as a white person, you do not know what it's like to be the only black person until you go to Japan. And only when you go to Japan or go to places where you're the only white person can you start to empathize with the black people and be like, oh, because a lot of times white people speak, you know, from a position of never ever understanding of being a minority, unless you are a white person who went to a predominantly black school where you probably do have, experiences of being a minority, because it's kind of like when you're being lied to and manipulated and nobody says anything. Nobody walks up to you and says, that person is manipulating you. Nobody looks out for you. Nobody looks out for your self interest. People just laugh along. It could lead to a distrust of white people when when they don't come to you and let you know when you're being when they let you know that you're being manipulated, or when there is this cultural difference between blacks and whites, and as the black person you're going to be more streets, more ghetto, like, hey, what up, dog, and whatnot, and for white people to just avoid you and stay away from you. And it's kind of, what did I do? What did I do? Well, it's like, well, I'm just treating you the way I would treat white people. I don't even like white people who act like this. Why would I like a black person? See what I mean? How color blindness could be a problem. And it's so, this race stuff is really, really complicated. It's really, really complicated talking about race. But yes, it's kind of like it doesn't help. It certainly doesn't help when you avoid a person like the plague instead of saying, Ran, when you do such and such, you're bothering me. Ran, I would like to see you work on this. Like, please work on this, Ran, as it's bothering me. And I do think that that would be a way to have been able to move forward. But yeah, I think I covered everything. I don't know if I explained everything well, but you would see more of what I mean if you watch the Prince of Queens video. It's called Why Are Black College Students So Angry? And neither one of us are social justice warriors. I'm not a social justice warrior. Um, he is not one either, but it's kind of like explaining, where they're coming from. It's kind of like, with microaggressions, you kind of notice when people are just giving you looks or treating you a certain way. And it could originally have been, like passive aggression, but when it comes to passive aggressive behavior, that is done to Black people is microaggressions. Like, oh, you are very articulate. I'm just, here to say that to you. And it's kind of like when you're being passive aggressive, it's hard to explain that this person is being passive aggressive. And on a technicality, they did give a compliment, but it's like, you're very, very articulate. Being passive aggressive is kind of hard to explain to other people that technically this person did give you a compliment, but it's the way that they say it, the way that they look at you, that you can tell that they don't really like you. It's just really something to think about. It's a lot more complicated and nuanced than I think that the aunties are, arguing. And the thing is, it could cause stronger problems later on where the victory is limited. Because if anything is going to, go through life, you got to communicate well. And I'm not saying that I am doing an amazing job communicating what I'm trying to say, but I do not have a script in front of me. But for people who do use scripts and they do like, I script my videos. It's kind of important to understand that communications is really important. And it's important parts of communicating your ideas is seeing where the other side is coming from instead of dismissing. Because if you keep dismissing the other side, if you keep dismissing each and every single feminist, each and every single Black Lives Matter, each and every single person on the left, the more and more you dismiss something without understanding, this issue is going to come back. And this is why it's like a pendulum. We swing to the far right, we swing to the far left, we swing to the far right again, we swing to the far left. We keep going on this pendulum swing because you got to communicate. And parts of communications is listening to other people, understand where they're coming from. Only then could you change minds. And it's about how many minds you can change, how persuasive you can be, because it's important to remember that social justice is in the media, it's in the government, and it's in the colleges. And social justice is really terribly infiltrated in the colleges. And so it's kind of like we may have won this internet war, but given that it's in the colleges and these white teachers are empathizing with Black students, this could be a sign of more problems to come. You got to understand where a person's coming from and come up with an alternative solution which is satisfactory, you know. I still, like Sargon and Prince of Queens and what's not, but I do think that it's important to see where the other side is coming from because then you could be more effective in changing a person's mind. Anyway, this has been Random Michaelis. Did you agree with me? Did you disagree with me? If you did disagree with me, tell me why. Leave me all of them wonderful comments down below. And if you did like this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it everywhere. Please tell all of your friends about me. Bye bye.